a certain superhero's grizzled whiskers. The hairy frog from Cameroon, Africa is a rather unassuming 4-inch amphibian. Besides the odd hair on its sides, it seems just like any other frog. When grabbed by a predator, however, it doesn't just croak and give up. It fights, scratching at the threat with specially adapted claws that resemble a cat's. It does this by breaking its own toe bones in order to force the claw through the skin. With the retraction of a single muscle, there's a quiet pop, and the claw is ready to strike. With the predator suitably subdued, the frog hops home and passes on its genes to the next generation. Number 1. Bombardier beetle. To top off this round of curious warriors, we have a rather unassuming beetle. Its brown and red, or black and brown body deftly hiding an amazing secret. The bombardier beetle has a red-hot way of dealing with threats. It simply turns around and blasts its enemy with boiling water. Yes, you heard that right. This beetle is literally a time bomb. Inside its body are 2 separate chambers filled with chemicals that, when combined, cause the chemicals to boil. Since it sprays away from itself, it comes to no harm, but its enemies will think twice before messing with it again. Thanks for watching. Please like and share the video on social media.
So what do you think?
That was actually fascinating.
Fascinating? Yeah?
That's like the last one.
The last one? Did you know that they could have boiling water as a structural adaptation?
No.
No? What do you think about the frog?
I thought it was actually pretty weird that it would break its own toe bones just to get claws out of its skin.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's so small that it made the point. Our frogs that we have here in East Tennessee that we see,
They're tiny.
they're tiny. So when a predator comes after them, they don't have much for survival except for maybe to run or jump to try to get out of the situation.
But that frog is clawing.
Yeah, but that one has the structural adaptation for survival. If they're not able to survive, are they able to reproduce?
No.
No. So, it's very interesting. If you will hand these out for me.
Maybe exploring it. So risking your life with a clean.
Yeah, so there's lots of behavioral and structural adaptations that animals possess that we might not even know about, but they are very intriguing. But these are how they survive, how they adapt to their environment for survival, to live amongst other animals. And just like last time, if you will pull out a highlighter, or even if you have a marker or a pencil, this article I'm handing out is chock full of information of what we are going to be talking about today as far as structural and behavioral adaptation. Yes, just anything. You're going to see a lot of our vocabulary words in there. If you see them, circle them so that way you can remember them and use key details in the text to maybe get a better understanding of what we're talking about. If you see anything else that you think, hey, this is important, we might need to know about this, you can circle that as well. So, everybody get one? No. Who did it? Ray, did you get one? No. You skipped them. Okay. Thank you, Christian. If you guys will just follow along, and it says adaptation and survival. And adaptation is any heritable trait that helps an organism, such as a plant or animal, survive and reproduce in its environment. What is heritable?
We get it from someone.
Yeah, it basically means heritage. And when you think about heritage, you think about your family line. It's a trait that resembles the traits of your parents. It says koalas climb a eucalyptus tree. A koala hugs a tree while her baby clings to her back at the Lola Pine Koala Sanctuary near Brisbane, Queensland, Australia. Koalas have adapted to eat only the leaves of eucalyptus trees. Eucalyptus trees are very low in protein and toxic to many animal species. Being able to digest eucalyptus leaves is an adaptation that benefits the koala by providing it a food source for which there is little competition. So, what structural adaptations do koalas have? What do we notice, Christian?
Being able to digest and all up the
Eucalyptus tree?
Yeah.
Yeah. A eucalyptus tree, it says that it has very low protein and it's toxic to many other animals. So for koalas to be able to digest this eucalyptus plant, they have little competition, so they're not having to fight for food. They're not having to compete against other animals to get this food for survival. So that's a structural adaptation that koalas have. This says animals of the same species are not all exactly the same. Differences largely come from an organism's genes. Genes can be thought of as instructions that are passed down from parent to child. They shape how living things look and behave. Some differences help an animal survive and are called adaptations. Adaptations are passed on from one generation to the next. Over time, they spread and become part of the species. Based on the information in the text, can we describe what a gene is? Anybody?
something that is like passed down.
Yeah, so it's
Something that's like in your blood.
right. It's something that is passed down through your parents. It's so if your parents have blonde hair, if they have a gene for blonde hair, then you're more likely to have blonde hair too, right?
Yeah.
Or brown hair, or blue eyes and green eyes. So it says structural and behavioral adaptations. Some adaptations are structural. That means they are a physical part of the organism. Other adaptations are behavioral, affecting the way a living thing acts. So what's the biggest difference in these two types of adaptations? One's physical and one is behavioral. An example of a structural adaptation is the way some plants have adapted to dry, hot deserts. Plants called succulents have found a way to survive there. They do it by storing water in their thick stems and leaves. So a succulent is like a cactus. What else is a structural adaptation on a cactus that may help protect it?
Spikes.
Yeah, the spikes, the thorns. It helps protect their
Water.
Yeah, protect their water. Migration is an example of a behavioral adaptation. Gray whales migrate thousands of kilometers every year. They swim from the cold Arctic water to the warm waters of the coast of Mexico. Gray whale calves are born in the warm water. Later, they travel to Arctic waters to feed. Some adaptations are called exaptation. An exaptation is an adaptation developed for one purpose but used for another. For example, feathers. Feathers were probably adaptations for managing temperature. Later, they grew bigger and allowed some species to fly. And then we're talking about habitat. Adaptations are often a response to change in the environment. England's peppered moth is a famous example. Before the 1800s, most peppered moths were light with darker spots. Some moths were gray or black. However, these darker moths were rare. Over time, the rise of factories changed the environment. So this is something that we talked about Earth Day. This is involved in the Earth Day. The darker moths became more common. Their sooty color. What is soot? Do we know what soot is when we think about a fireplace? It's like the black stuff. If you are near the ashes that come from a fire and you get that soot on you, it's the dusty black leftover ash grainy material. So these moths were getting that soot on them, and it says their sooty color blended in with the trees stained by pollution. Birds could not see the dark moths, so they ate the light moths instead. So would this be considered a structural or a behavioral adaptation?
Behavioral.
Structural, because it's a physical change. Speciation. Sometimes an organism develops an adaptation that splits one species into two. This is known as speciation. One way this can happen is through physical isolation. A good example is the wide range of marsupials in Oceania. This area includes Australia and New Zealand. Long ago, Oceania was part of Asia. Before it broke away, marsupials arrived. Marsupials are mammals that carry their young in their pouches. I had one on the board earlier. A kangaroo, yeah. So a kangaroo is a marsupial. They are now the main type of mammal in Oceania because it says Australia and New Zealand, and that's where kangaroos mainly are, right? Koalas are one of the most famous marsupials. Did you know that? Okay. It says they adapted to feed on the eucalyptus tree. These trees grow in Australia. The Tasmanian tiger was a meat-eating marsupial. It adapted to fill the role being played by cats, such as tigers and other continents. These different marsupials are an example of speciation. They developed to fill empty roles in their environment. And the last one says co-adaptation. Organisms sometimes adapt with other organisms. What other species of animals use mimicry as... Do we know what mimicry is?
No.
Have you ever heard of miming?
Yes.
Or when you mimic somebody? What happens if Christian is sitting here talking and I am saying everything, the same thing that he says to annoy him? You're copying him. Another word for copying is mimicking, when you're mimicking somebody, doing the same thing that they are doing. So it says, this is called co-adaptation. Certain flowers have adapted to their nectar to appeal to hummingbirds. Hummingbirds have adapted long, thin beaks to drink nectar from certain flowers. This relationship helps both organisms. When the hummingbird drinks nectar, it picks up pollen and spreads to other flowers. The hummingbird gets food, and the plant's pollen gets distributed. Mimicry is another type of co-adaptation, which is what we just talked about. With mimicry, one organism has adapted to look like another. The harmless king snake is a good example. Over time, it has developed a color pattern and looks like a deadly coral snake. This mimicry keeps predators away from the king snake. What's another animal? What other animal can we think of that maybe changes? Mason?
Monarch.
A what?
A monarch. It looks like a poisonous butterfly.
Yeah, a monarch. What is the animal called that changes colors?
Chameleon.
A chameleon, yeah. So it changes colors to fit its environment. So when it's climbing a tree, it takes the color of the tree and so forth. So it is invisible to predators. So, yeah, it happens in movies.
The predators will know on top of the tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I am going to put you into groups of 3. And I'm going to popsicle stick you into groups of 3. And what I want you to do is I'm going to assign each group an animal. One animal. And each person in your group is going to use your school laptop to conduct a research. You're going to research your animal. And what I want you to research about your animal is the structural and behavioral adaptations.
Ms. Dawson, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second. 9 o'clock people, you may go if you're a 9 o'clock person.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. Okay, so you're in your research. You're going to look up structural and adaptations of your animal. I'll get to you this second. And you're going to use a sheet of notebook paper to write down as many facts as you can. Everybody should be on their laptop researching, so we're not leaving it up to one person. And I'll give you some time to do that, and then we'll move on, because we've got 2 other parts of this that we're going to do. So the first things first, Mason and choose 2 partners and find an area in the room to sit with them. 2 partners.